What's up, guys? Today we're going to go over the skull. So there's a lot of different parts of the skull. They're super close to each other, so sometimes it can get confusing. So we're going to go over each one individually. So starting off, we're going to start with the superciliary ridges, which are going to be right here. These are going to be your eyebrows. So it's going to be right here and here, right where you think your eyebrows are. And then you're going to have your coronal suture, which is going to be this suture right here. The one that goes across, think about the crown of your skull. It's going to be your coronal suture right here. And then you're going to have your coronal suture, which is going to be this suture right here. The one that goes across, think about the crown of your skull. It's going to be your coronal suture right here. So then you also have your sagittal suture, which is this one that goes across the middle of your cranium right here. So this is your sagittal suture. You have your lambdoid suture, which is going to be this one right here. Your lambdoid suture is the most posterior one. And then you have your temporal suture, which is going to be this one on the side. So it's going to be this one right here. This is all going to be your temporal suture. You have your mandibular fossa, which is right here. This is where your mandible fits in, like this. Like that, that's where your mandible fits in. You have your zygomatic process for your temporal bone, which is right here. Then you have your mastoid process right here. It's this big, huge one. Think of this big, huge one as your mastoid process. This sharp, pointy one is your styloid process. Styloid process right here. It looks kind of like the end of a pencil or something like that. You also have your external auditory meatus, which is going to be this hole right here. And then on the inside, this little mountain range area, like this area, is going to be your petrous portion. The inside is your petrous portion. And then you have your carotid canal. So your carotid canal is going to be this area right here. This area in here is going to be your carotid canal on both sides. And if you flip it over, it could be showing you either way. Your carotid canal is going to be right here on both sides. And then you also have your jugular foramen. So your jugular foramen, some people get confused between which one. Is it your carotid canal or your jugular foramen? Your jugular foramen is going to be closest to this, which is your foramen magnum. So your jugular foramen is going to be this huge hole right here. Both of these. And if you flip it over, it's going to be this hole right here on both sides, closest to this foramen magnum. Your carotid canals are back up here again, remember? And then your jugular foramen are down here. And then moving to the occipital bone, you have, of course, your foramen magnum again right here. You have your occipital condyles, which if you flip it like this, you can clearly see this is where your first vertebrae innervates. It innervates right here on both sides. That's where it kind of sits like that. Then you have your external occipital protuberance, which is right here. That's where you have your trapezius muscle innervates right there. It's one of the insertions for it. And then you move to the sphenoid bone. So if you look at the sphenoid bone in here, you have your body, which is going to be this part right here. We're going to call this part your body. You have your optic canals, which are going to be in here, sticking through here, and this side. It's going to be your optic canals. So your optic canals is also going to be these top ones right here, and on this side. And then we have the sella turcica, or the Turkish saddle is like the name for it. So the sella turcica is this part right here. Your pituitary gland sits right in this little saddle area. Then you have your lesser wings and your greater wings. So these little parts up here are your lesser wings, and then the greater wings are right in here. This is going to be considered your greater wings. Over your sphenoid and ethmoid bones separately out of your skull, so you kind of can see what it looks like by itself. So once again, you have your optic canal right here, and here. That's going to be your optic canal. And then you're going to have your greater wings right here, greater wings. Lesser wings are going to be these ones up top. You're going to have the body right here, your sella turcica or Turkish saddle right here where your pituitary gland sits, and then that's pretty much it. You're going to have your ethmoid bone right here. So this part is going to be your cribriform plate, where your olfactory foramina are, and your cribriform plate. This is going to be your crista galli right here, your crista galli, and you have your perpendicular plate. Is this part down here. This is going to be your perpendicular plate. And then if we go, so you have your, on the skull you can see your crista galli, which is this pointy thing right here. This pointy thing, and then you have your cribriform plate. So the crista galli sits in the crib. This is the cribriform plate right here. This part where these little holes are all called olfactory foramina. The holes in the cribriform plate are the olfactory foramina. That's where your olfactory nerves pass through for you to be able to smell. And then this, of course, is your crista galli again. Your perpendicular plate, you can kind of see up here. Your perpendicular plate is right there. It's the top bone. This is actually two bones fused together. This bone right here is your vomer, and then up here is your perpendicular plate of your ethmoid bone. And then we are going to the facial bones. So you have 8 cranial bones and 14 facial bones. So the first one we're going to talk about is your mandible. So for the mandible, you have the body, which is this area right here. On each side, it's going to be considered the body. Then we have your angle, which is going to be this part right here. This part right here is going to be considered your angle, kind of where it kind of makes a U shape right here. Then you have your ramus. Your ramus is just this vertical part right here. If you see different rami in different places, you have, rami is basically a flat section of bone that extends. So you have a couple of rami on your pelvis too. But on your jaw, it's going to be, your mandible, it's going to be right here. So then we have your mental foramen, which are going to be these holes right here. This is going to be your mental foramen. It doesn't have one on the other side. Mental foramen right here. And then you have your coronoid process, which is going to be these ones right here. Both sides are going to be your coronoid process. Now don't get confused. You have a lot of processes called coronoid or coracoid. On your mandible, it's called coronoid. The only time you have a coracoid is on your scapula. When we get to scapula, you'll have a coracoid process, but for these, it's going to be coronoid. So, mandibular condyle, which is this part right here. That's the part we talked about earlier that fits into your mandibular fossa right here. So your mandibular condyles is what fits there. Then you have your alveolar processes, which are all these processes in your teeth. These little kind of protrusions right here. Then we're going to go to the maxilla, which is this bone right here. This whole bone is going to be called your maxilla. It's two bones fused together. And you have your palatine process of the maxilla, which is going to be this part right here. This part right here is going to be your palatine process of your maxilla. Then we have your alveolar processes once again, which look the same as they do on your mandible. Then you have your lacrimal bones, which are these bones right here. This area is your lacrimal bone. And this particular groove right here is going to be called your lacrimal sulcus. And that's where your tears drain. They drain through here and go into your nose. So that's why if you cry a lot, you get a lot of like liquid in your nose and stuff. And then nasal bones are these two right here. These two right here are going to be your nasal bones. And then your vomer is like this one right here we talked about, right in the middle. And then you have two inferior nasal concha, which are these two bones right here. These two bones are your inferior nasal concha. Then you have your palatine bones, which is an L-shaped bone right here. Kind of goes like this. This is right here would be your palatine bone. It's two of them fused together. And what you need to know is the horizontal plate of the palatine bone, which is going to be these parts right here. There are two bones fused together right here. This is the horizontal plate of the palatine bone. And then you have your zygomatic bones, which is just going to be this big bone right here. On both sides, it's going to be your cheekbone. So, with your fetal skull, we're just going to look at the bones first. So you have your frontal bone, which is this part right here. This is where your frontal bone isn't fused together yet, so it's two separate bones. And then you have your parietal bones, which are these two right here. You have your temporal, which is going to be on the side right here, your temporal bones. On this side and this side. And then you have your occipital bone in the back. And you're going to look at two major fontanelles. So fontanelles are these part right here. So when you get to a certain age, these harden and you don't have to worry about this anymore. But when you have really young kids, this is the soft spot that people talk about that you don't really want to touch or mess with, because it's more dangerous. You have more possibility of brain damage if you hurt this part right here. So you have two fontanelles that are your major ones. So this is going to be your anterior fontanelle, and in the back is going to be your posterior fontanelle. And that's going to be it for the anatomy of these particular skulls.